tools to navigate the changes they face in the world. Can anyone relate? In this podcast, you'll hear from parents, educators, and other experts who can bring perspective to the monumental job of parenting. We can't count on anyone else. We have to be the warriors for our kids. This is the Warrior Parent Podcast. I'm Marci Mitchell.
And I'm DiManno. As parents, we understand that we are partners with schools and other leaders in our communities. So join us as we use the science of the educational process known as SEL, or social emotional learning, as well as other proven mind-body techniques to create a collection of exercises and tools for kids of all ages.
In today's episode, we'll talk to Vashti Summervill with Family Healing Pathways, dedicated to parent consulting, therapeutic educational consulting, and mindfulness-based stress reduction.
All right, let's dig in. All right, so let's dig in, everybody. I am so excited this week because we get to have one of my most favorite people in the whole world on the podcast, which is Vashti Summervill. And we have known Vashti for, 5 or 6 years now, something like that. We met at a workshop together and we knew that we were going to be lifelong friends. And we just love her and are honored to be with her today. And we're super proud of the work that she does and her evolution. So anyway, Vashti, without further ado, I'm going to let you do a bigger introduction about some of the things that you're doing right now, about your certifications, and take it away. Let us know.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and the feeling's mutual. It's always such a pleasure to get to spend time with both of you, and we just haven't seen each other enough lately, so we need to fix that.
Yes.
Yeah, so I wear a few different hats. My background is in education, but I was a music teacher. So there's like this evolution. People go, how did you get from music teaching to sort of mental health? And I was noticing changes in my students, increases in anxiety and depression and behavioral issues, and more students on medication. And at the same time, my own kids were hitting adolescence, and it just made me realize what a hard time it is to grow up and a hard time to parent. And, we went through some pretty big things in our family, and I came out the other side of all that and just thought, how could I combine my lived experience with all my years in education and sort of be that person we needed during some of our more challenging times. So I went back to school. I went to the Parent Coaching Institute, and it was about a 1-year program for a parent coaching certification. And I launched a parent coaching practice. And then I was just getting really a lot of crisis calls, a lot of referrals for people that needed much more than just parent coaching. And that's when a colleague told me about the world of therapeutic consulting, which is basically, I don't know how to describe this other than you kind of quarterback a team for tapping into mental health services, primarily residential treatment. So I started touring programs across the country along the continuum of care to understand what exists. So I either wear the hat of a parent coach or a therapeutic consultant, and sometimes both. So I do work primarily with parents of adolescents or young adults who are struggling. I have a lot of young adult clients in the consulting world that I work with. So as a consultant, we're touring programs along the continuum of care across the country to understand history, reputation, safety, get to know the clinical staff or academic staff, whoever we need to know to really understand that program and the profile of kid that they best serve. And then when a family has sort of exhausted all local resources, we do a really intense intake and assessment process to get to know that family and that young adult or adolescent and what their needs are, so that we can kind of start to match them with potential programs that are a good fit.
So can I interrupt just a minute?
Yeah.
I think parents are wondering what those issues might be. Like what would cause a parent to get to a place where they might need you? Like how, because some people are just like, oh, my child's just having a little anxiety or whatever. And then there's the extreme, right? So maybe give us a few examples of what some of those issues might be or why they might reach out to you.
Yeah, and I think that's a really there's just a lot of gray area, right? And you've both been parents, and so you're parenting this teen that starts to struggle and really trying to discern what's on that spectrum of normal teenage angst and struggle and what is really a warning sign, right? So, with the parent coaching, a lot of times people will start where their child's maybe with a local therapist, and then they engage me as a parent coach to say, hey, what's in our control? What can we do to help move that therapeutic dial while our kids working on themselves? What can we clean up in terms of communication and perspective taking and holding boundaries and all that? And so that question comes up a lot of, when do we know that this isn't working? And I kind of look at a handful of things. Are there significant safety issues, right? That's going to be the primary. So threat of harm to self or others, which we see a lot of threat of harm to self, more than I see, kids threatening others. So self-harm, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, that would be obviously a circumstance where you would need to consider a residential treatment option. I look at, are the behaviors spiraling in a downward direction, or are you kind of getting this sort of, okay, you have a situation and then you get a rebound, and then maybe you go along for a while longer and there's another situation, but you're rebounding, and maybe you're always rebounding just a little bit higher, right? So that trajectory is moving towards wellness.
Right.
And then I look at how much gas is in the tank for the family system, because everyone matters in these situations, right? And oftentimes it's a system issue, and I'll point the finger at myself, right? There's none of us who are a perfect parent. And so sometimes a teen or a young adult is kind of acting out some of what's not working well in the system, but everyone matters, right? And so sometimes there's behaviors that are so extreme and so scary that it's impacting siblings and the parents. So how much stamina is left in the family system, in the support network to really be keeping that kid safe and continuing to work? Or does everyone need a break? Does there need to be a change in context, some breathing space? And then I think another important thing to look at is, does the child have a vision for their own recovery, right? Some hope that it's going to get better. Are they really paralyzed with a thinking pattern that says this will never change?
Well, I think what's interesting, and the reason Marci and I decided to do this, because, as you know, when we started doing these live workshops, it was all about the kids, right? Like we're so intent on doing something for the kids. But through that process, when we started bringing the parents in, we realized what a toll it was taking on the parents. And meanwhile, of course, we've been through a pandemic and everything else, but without the parents being in a healthy place, there's nothing was going to work, right? There's just no juice in the gas tank to get everyone through that. And I think that's where Marci and I came to the Warrior Parent podcast, realizing like we were warrior parents, not saying that like yourself, like, oh, wow, we're some perfect parents. No, it's just for us to have an understanding that we're all in this together. Like this is big, and these are very difficult times. So.
Yeah, and to me, the term warrior parent none of us are perfect, right? So it's saying, I'm going to wake up the next day and try to do better than I did the day before. And it's just showing up.
Yes.
And
Yes, exactly.
Right. Just continuing to show up.
Yeah. And sometimes you are called to show up in ways that surprise you or frighten you or amaze you. But you just keep, like you say, showing up and doing the best you can in that moment based on what your kid needs in that moment. And it's not always the same.
Yeah. And I often say that, it seems like such a daunting task sometimes to face everything that's coming at you. And it's really easy to, catastrophize and think into the future. So a lot of times I'll coach parents to just slow things down and just say, what does this moment require?
Yeah.
And what does this moment require?
We talk a lot about empowering kids, and it's super important with around their mental health. But being a warrior parent is an empowered parent too, and knowing that you can step up, and just because someone's wearing a hat that says principal or doctor or whatever doesn't mean that you don't know your kid better than anyone, and that sometimes you have to say, nope, this is not working for my kid. And I know that came up for me so many times between, teachers, IEP meetings, doctors saying, I hear you've got your plan, but that's not working and we need to try something different.
Yeah, I think parents, they are the change agents, right? We have that power, but oftentimes we're so disconnected from our belief in ourselves, our own intuition, and we're looking for professionals, right? And I think the coaching piece is helping parents find that internal compass again, right? Because they know you're the expert on your child. You're the expert on yourself. Yes. And so just reconnecting to your intuition and having that confidence that oftentimes you do know what the right next step is, but you question yourself and you doubt.
Yes, exactly.
So I think that brings us to the new piece that you're incorporating into your training, right? Which is the mindfulness-based stress reduction. So tell us a little bit more about that. Let's talk about being present in the moment.
Okay, so I'm really fascinated by the concept of resilience and how our minds work, this idea of neuroscience, right? Neuroplasticity, this idea that our brains can continue to change, and sort of zooming out and looking at stuck patterns within ourselves and within our families. They're really kind of stuck thought loops. Yep. Right. And so there are these pathways in the brain that are just so practiced, and we just continue to practice, but it's creating new pathways is hard. It's like creating a new snowshoe trail, right? You're just like post-holing. It's not following the one that everyone's been on.
I'm going to use that term, post-holing.
Yeah, like where your foot falls through the snow when there's no trail and it's deep snow. Yeah. And so I'm fascinated by how do we create more resilience, right? Because that's really what we need. And I could go on another tangent, but I won't now, that I think a lot of us as parents have, what's the word I heard the other day? We're doing the wrong things, but for the right reasons, right? So we have these really great intentions, but in some ways, our actions are inadvertently feeding the anxiety because we can't contain our own anxiety. So we're trying to problem solve and soften things for our kids. And we're not really parenting for resilience when we do that. But they didn't come with instruction manuals and what to expect when expecting didn't tell you about self-harming and suicidality and gender dysphoria and like all these things that parents are facing, right? Yeah. So with MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, I was really drawn to it. It's ancient concepts, but it's been packaged in a way that is, there's been a lot of scientific study, like brain imaging, what's happening to those neural pathways when people implement these practices. And then also removing any kind of religious barrier, right? Because this is done from an approach that isn't rooted in any kind of religion. It might be considered spiritual to some people, but it really is about sitting with your mind and observing those habitual thought loops, right? And figuring out, okay, how can I be in relationship to what arises in a healthier way? And I've said this so many times with parents. I wish someone had sat me down when I was like 8 and said, your thoughts are not facts, right?
Yes.
And so it's just about cultivating a way of relating to what comes at you. There's suffering, right? We're not going to get rid of suffering. Suffering is there, but can we relate to it a little differently? And can we greet suffering in a way that we don't add a bunch of narrative to it and make it worse and compound the suffering?
Yes. Oh my God, that's brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah. And that's so much of, what I talked about this last week, but so much of, my own goal around this is that for me, being in this loop, in this negative loop for many, many years, got me to the place where my body was starting to shut down. There was so much negativity. And, I was in counseling for 25 years, right? So it was that piece that was misunderstood even by therapists so long ago. It's like, let's just keep digging through your past, instead of understanding the resiliency that my own brain had to move forward. And that's when everything changed for me. That's when I was able to start healing, right? Is to start the rewire. And I became healthy as a result of that, right? And so
yeah, it's so empowering, right? It's really empowering
Yes.
to figure that out. And sometimes people will refer to MBSR, the mindfulness-based stress reduction, as participatory medicine. So I love that, right? Because that's, once again, empowering. It's tapping back into what exists on the inside. And I think that if parents can learn this and model this, it will, it'll ripple out into our families. And as I see teens, older teens and young adults, I think that with the state of the world, they feel hopeless, a sense of hopelessness. They're not coming into adulthood with that, many of them, like with that sense of just limitless possibility that maybe you and I had, right? Yeah. They have climate change anxiety. They, everything's so expensive. So they're wondering, how am I going to create a life for myself? And I also see them rejecting they see us as your slaves to your mortgage and your jobs. And we want a life filled with more experience, but they're having a hard time figuring out how to get from their vision of what they think they want from where they are, right? From this stuck place. And I think with the mindfulness, like having that reset, because I say the people with the megaphones, so social media, news, like anything online, they're just blasting the negative, right? So it's just this repeated negativity. And Sharon Salzberg is just a wonderful meditation teacher and writer and speaker. And I think I was listening to one of her books on tape, and she was talking about the Buddhist concept of equanimity, that's a really hard word for me to understand, but I really could link it back into this stuck place that many of our kids are in. And so how do you move forward? How do you hold what is and what is possible all at the same time? So we're not ignoring all the bad stuff, but we're saying there's still beauty and mystery and miracles and all the stuff that does exist that we don't see. And she had the best analogy. She said, a forest burns and there's all the charred trees, right? It's really sad. It's really apocalyptic to drive by a forest fire or the remnants of a forest fire. But right after a fire, there's all these new green shoots that come up. And she said, don't the charred trees and the green shoots deserve equal attention? Yeah. And that's that refocus, right? That maybe practices like MBSR can do for parents and, eventually teach our young adults or adolescents. That's what they so desperately need, because they're just stuck in this, the world is awful kind of cycle.
Yes. Well, I think our dream, and Marci and I came to this conclusion, a lot of it after we had the workshops with you, and we saw the magic. It wasn't just the kids alone. It wasn't just the parents alone. But it was when we brought them all back into the room together, and you could see it was just like light bulbs going off for us included, right? And so I think our dream is exactly what you've said. We have all these brand new drive time meditations, which you'll hear about later. But the concept is these are little mini pieces, 2-minute pieces, and that people can listen to in their car. So the parents and the kids can start to help each other. The parent can have an awareness like, wow, mom's having a bad day. Hey, mom, let's put this thing on. Let's just take 2 minutes and everybody just, take a chill pill right now. Like if the family dynamic can start to support each other in this way, now we're making progress, right? Like everybody, all the pieces are coming together now to start to heal.
I love that. And a common language that, between parents and kids. And I think oftentimes when there's a kid who's acting out in ways that are scary, the whole focus of the family goes on that kid, right? And so this kid feels like they're under the microscope. So when a parent says, look, I'm on this parallel path with you and I'm taking action also. It removes the pressure from the kid, or the kid feeling like all eyes are on me and everyone thinks I'm the sick and broken one. No, this is a family journey. We're all learning to be better and live better as a team. It's not about one person. And so that, I think that you just sort of touched on that with the work that you're hoping to put out into the world.
Yeah.
That makes me think this might be a good time to talk about your Parent Reboot Challenge, which we have on our membership platform and you have on your website. Tell us a little bit about that and how a family can use that to kind of get into that let's all work together mindset instead of what's wrong with this child.
Yeah, so that was a COVID project, when I was kind of losing my mind during the lockdown, and I happened to be married to someone who's very good with technology. And so we rented a teleprompter and it's really fun to film videos. And I wrote kind of a 70-page workbook that was a great exercise for me, sort of distill themes or, just sort of common areas where I was seeing struggle and where I saw opportunity for parents to really be that agent of change, right? And really shift the trajectory out of those habit loops we talked about. So it was really a great personal project. I've probably benefited more from it than any other people have, because it just really helped me solidify some things. So it's just, I kind of break it down into a few different themes. I think we start with perspective taking, right? What's it like to walk through a day in the life of our kid? What are their burdens and challenges and moments of joy? What are the things we don't see? So it's sort of imagining a little bit, what is it like to be in their shoes? And then we're modeling that, right? Because we hope that they can start to have a wider perspective about and see us as humans, because sometimes I don't think kids see their parents as humans. So it's this learning to take perspective. And then it's looking at communication, right? How are we communicating? Oftentimes, I did an episode on the emotional bank account in my podcast once, and it was sort of, what does it feel like to be my child? Is sort of what I was exploring. So that emotional bank account or relationship bank account is the accumulation of goodwill. How do we make the other person feel? So I sort of wrote out a script of what I felt my kids heard from me in a day, and it was horrifying. It was just constant teaching, nagging, and correcting. And I thought, oh my gosh, it does not feel very good to be my kid, right? And so that got me thinking a lot about communication, not only what we're saying, but the timing of when we're saying it. So if you look at the brain and when our switch flips, right? When we're really dysregulated, everybody has that. Your switch flips and it's almost involuntary. That is not a good time to try to teach, correct, or connect. And I can't tell you how many times I sat on one of my daughter's beds, like, no, we're going to talk about this now. Work this out now. And it was like, no, it didn't. It needed space. And so, communication, and also looking at, no kid ever said, please give me another lecture, ever. Right. So how do we stay out of problem solving mode or lecture mode, which those do not cultivate resilience in our teens and young adults, right? We're trying to get them to tap into their internal power. So how do we use questions, not questions disguised as lectures, but really thoughtful questions that invite our teen or young adult to find their own insights?
Yeah.
Right. So that's sort of the communication piece, and then connection, right? And that can tap right back into how do we make our kids feel, but how are we deepening connection? Because connection is a protective factor for some of these things that scare us the most. The self-harm, the suicidality is having this sense of warmth and connection. And always working to cultivate that. There's a quote I love: build the connection, not the battle. And then boundaries, right? Boundaries is the other section of the Parenting Reboot Challenge. So our end game, what's our end game as parents? What would you guys say your end goal is?
Happy, well-adjusted adults.
Right. Debbie, do you have a definition?
Yeah, it's just happy and healthy, right? Like that's really, I mean, we could put 1,000 parents on here and they're going to tell you the same
Yeah.
thing.
So I do
Right.
challenge the word happy. I challenge parents on the word happy a little bit, because
Yeah.
what does
Okay.
that mean, right? And no one's happy all the time. So
Right.
my little phrase I say is, our end game is to raise capable, independent, compassionate, resilient adults.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if we can connect a boundary that we're trying to hold to one of those, then it's a boundary worth holding. It's not punitive. We are really connecting it to something worthwhile. So we
Yeah.
talk about, what do boundaries look like and how do you hold them?
I think you need to say that again.
Okay.
That was really
Yes.
good.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the
Say that
educator
again about,
community,
the
this
whole
is-
thing about what the goal is and then the boundary.
Okay. So the goal, like my goal as a parent, is to raise capable, independent, compassionate, and resilient adults, right? That's the goal.
Yeah.
So if you look at it from a teacher's perspective, which I'm a teacher, and back it up, okay, what do we need to get to that goal?
Yeah.
Those boundaries that we have to have in place that teach those things, those are the boundaries worth holding. They're not punitive. Those are connected to something very life-giving.
Yeah.
And sort of embodying that and being able to show our kids, like, I'm unshakable on this because this leads to this. And what happens in our sort of insecurities as parents, we inadvertently send our kids the message that we don't mean what we say. And our kids start to become masters. I don't think it's really intentional, but they don't want to move out of their comfort zone, just like we don't want to move out of our comfort zone.
Right.
So they become really skilled at manipulating parents and escalating situations in a way that a parent will cave on a boundary.
Yeah.
Right. And the kids are becoming more skilled at that.
Yeah.
than
And
developing
imagine a kid who has two parents and divorced parents and step parents and all. Think about those levels of manipulation, because there's a lot of, 50% of the kids have that situation right now, right? Like,
absolutely. And, parental unity, whether you're an intact family or a divorced, parental unity is a superpower, right? Those are the two superpowers, parental unity and taming your reactivity.
Yes.
And I think that kids are really perceptive. We think we're hiding things. We think we're hiding marital conflict, right? They walk into the room, we suddenly change. They're perceptive. We're perceptive. You can pick up on a lot of cues from a person's energy. And that goes with the boundaries. Like if I can sort of state a boundary and a kid's pushing back, if they can sense like an internal calm, like I am really aligned internally with what I'm asking of you now, so I'm unshakable. They pick that up and then they stop, right?
Yeah. And that goes back to what you were saying about when you're in that reactive state, you can't have that. If you're in the reactive state, you are not coming from that calm, just centered, this is the way it is space. So of course they're going to see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So yeah, I want to pivot a little bit. And you're sitting here in your expertise of parenting. And I think, for us, it's about being very raw and authentic about what we have had to go through as parents. And I'm wondering if you're willing to share some of your story about how you got here, not just from being a school teacher to being a parent coach, but like the life story that you went through, whatever you're comfortable with. I know this is a difficult subject, but I think people need to understand that.
I know there's power in vulnerability, right? I think that being vulnerable can be a really helpful thing to other people. I think I said in the beginning that my goal, my why for doing this work is to be the person that we needed in some of our dark times. And you used the word sitting here in your expertise. I don't know about that. I always make sure and tell parents, like, I'm in the big, messy, beautiful boat with you, right? Just because I teach this doesn't mean I get it right all the time. But I go back to that concept of I'm just going to keep showing up every day, trying to do better than I did the day before, right? And we've been through a lot with our kids, so many of the things that we've already touched on here and that so many parents are experiencing. Extreme depression, anxiety, some self-harm, some pretty big things. And I think, I will share that in small doses with people, just so that, not to make it about me, but just to be relatable. Because I don't want anybody to think, well, I'm teaching this stuff because I just did it so perfectly. Because I did not. And I think if I look back towards, in hindsight, I can see a lot. I can see where I contributed to the struggles, some of my kids' struggles. And I'm in a healthy place of not self-blaming or self-shaming, which is we're really hard on ourselves as parents. So I'm not there, but I can see now where doing the wrong things for the right reasons, right? And if I were to sort of reflect on my biggest mistake, it was not being able to contain my own anxiety and allow my kids to sit through some discomfort and uncertainty. And instead, at the first sign of that, I would panic, right? Panic and jump into rescuer, problem solver, cheerleader. And I inadvertently robbed my kids of opportunities to cultivate resilience earlier on. Right. So that's been a really, really big learning. And, that concept again of doing the wrong things for the right reasons. If we really think about what's driving some of our parenting now, if we just name it, we are afraid of our kids dying.
Yes,
and
we are.
We're going to name it and say, we're afraid of them taking their lives. We are afraid of death by, overdose. Or some kind of accident around substance use or putting yourself in a compromised situation. So if we just name that is the big fear, the big elephant in the room that drives some of this behavior to soften the world for our kids.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not always having the intended outcome, and it's actually feeding some of the problems. And I'm not blaming parents that have experienced these horrible situations. I don't blame myself for what we went through, but I can say, where are the things that I just didn't know, right? I was doing the best I could. We're all doing the best we can with the tools we have.
Yes.
What do we know now that helps us do it a little better?
Yeah.
And, keeping our kids stuck because we're afraid of them dying is not healing. It's not healing the presenting issues. So there's this whole, but it's not easy, and it's not black and white. And it's this whole big gray area, experimenting and approaching them with curiosity and empathy, and approaching yourself with curiosity and empathy. And it's really, really hard work.
Well, empowerment, right, is the piece. And we're going to have a bigger discussion with Yuli around that. And we've done some suicide training ourselves around the differences in the generations and how different it was. I'm the oldest person here. I'm a boomer. And, I have a young one. I have a 20-year-old. So there's a big gap in between here and there, and the way it was for me. And I think, Marci and I intend to have a lot of those conversations about the world that we're living in right now. And it's not the way it was when I was a kid. Just go to work and show up, and if you do this, it's all linear, like this will happen and these are the outcomes, and you'll buy a house and you'll have a family, and none of that exists anymore. None of it, right? It just doesn't. So we're excited to have that conversation, have some perspective for parents who
I'll look forward to that conversation. And I think you just touched on how the parenting pendulum has swung also a little bit. Right. So when we were growing up, it was a lot of, do what I say. And parents were a little stricter and maybe a little less in tune emotionally. Some parents, I would say many of us were raised that way. But then we had a lot of grit, right? Like, I think I can thank my mom and have gratitude for a lot of the ways I was raised, because I learned a lot about having some grit and perseverance. And then I think the pendulum swung to where it's almost like an over-functioning as parents. I joke that I'm going to start Overparenting Anonymous, and I'll be the president of the club, right? Because it's overdoing it. And so, some of that grit hasn't been cultivated in the way maybe it was when we were raised. So can we get this little correction, right? Where we land in that sweet spot of, we can hold boundaries, we can guide our kids to be solvers of their own problems. And we can also be curious and be empathetic and be in tune with them emotionally and be okay with them being who they are and not needing to mold them in a way that we think they need to be. So I think there could be this correction that comes back.
That's something that's really a lot of what you're saying. I bring back to, of course, my own relationship with my kids. And so I'm barely younger than Debbie, but I'm technically Gen X, and because we're right on that line. But my kids are older. I have a 27-year-old and a 25-year-old, and I have conversations with them now. It does start to change, and some of this is that amazing mentality of the Gen Zers. Like, they're just fantastic, and I love them so much. But my son, who is a transgender male and on the spectrum, he just educates me so often. And I've had him say to me at times, I don't feel that you're hearing me, or, and stop me in my tracks, because I'm in that fixing mode, because he'll say something negative about himself and I'm jumping right in. And he wants me to hear him and wants me to hear what he's trying to express. And it's a new neural pathway that I'm trying to create, not to just start telling him, no, you're great, you're wonderful, because he is. And I can sit and listen to him explain what's going on, and not be the over. I'm going to get into that over for Performers Anonymous group. I'm not, but I need to be an inaugural member.
Well, it's interesting. Yes, they are our greatest teachers. And for as many struggles as this generation has, they're also just so intelligent and open-minded and creative. And, I find a lot of hope in that.
Yeah.
And going back to him sort of teaching you, I don't feel like you're hearing me, and you saying, okay, how am I responding when he's sharing something, goes back to parents being the agents of change. And there's a lot of research now coming out of Yale, the Center for Emotional Intelligence. And there's Ellie Leibovitz. Actually, I have it right here. I have this book right here. He wrote this book, of child anxiety and OCD. And there's a lot of studies that he's doing through a program now called SPACE, Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions. I think that's important. And I attended a workshop with him, and he talked a lot about the research showing that parents making these changes, and maybe the child never even interacts with the therapist, but the parent goes through this process and learns these new skills, that the outcomes were really, really successful. And he talks about this idea of support not being problem solving, right? Not being making accommodations, but it's hearing, right? And so you're validating, and then you're expressing your confidence in your child's ability to handle the distress of whatever it is, and that's truly supportive, right? So, hey, I can see that this is really painful for you right now, and this is what you're sharing with me is really bothering you, and I'm 100% confident in your ability to handle it. And that's
beautiful,
a great statement to make, right? And maybe that also helps shape that self-talk, right? Of another quote I love is, the core of the relationship with the child is the way they believe we see them. So do our children believe that we see them as broken and incapable, or as, whole, more as right with them than is wrong with them? That's a John Kabat-Zinn thing from MBSR. And do we see them as capable, right? So when we say something like, I see that this is painful, what you're sharing with me, I can see it's really hurting you, and I'm confident in your ability to handle it. That's helping shape that narrative of I'm confident. My mom thinks I'm confident and capable.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe I am, as opposed to, okay, here's my ideas, and let's try this, and I'm going to solve this for you. That might send the message, oh, I need somebody else always to figure this out for me.
right?
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
just those two things, right? If every parent knew, like, that could go a long way, right? Yeah, some of these things are so simplistic, but we just need to understand them and have an open mind and an open heart and be willing to learn some new things, even if our kids are older, right?
Absolutely. And, because I'm a teacher, I'm like always reading things, and then I take every new concept. I'm like, how can we, get this out there? And, I'm a little late to the party on this book that's fairly old. So I've been reading Codependent No More by Melody Beatty, and sort of taking concepts from it. And she does touch on using some of these concepts in a parent-child relationship that might not have anything to do with substance use, but maybe other acting out behaviors. And there's so much that I'm kind of playing with in my mind from the book from a parenting lens. And she talks about this concept of detachment with love. So as our kids get older and we're working to not be over involved and not be that problem solver, how do we detach, but with love, in a way that leads everyone into healthier places? So I'm not detaching from you as a person, but I'm detaching from always having to be involved in every problem and inserting myself in every problem, I think, because our kids would say, I didn't ask you to do this, right? Yes. And so that takes a lot of courage and sitting with anxiety and letting things play out in a way that might be scary, as opposed to we're overparenting, we're trying to prevent. We don't prevent it. It still happens in a lot of ways, if that makes sense. So it's a brand new concept I'm working with, especially as my kids get older. How do I detach, not from them, but just from needing to insert myself into everything? So that's a brand new one. It's percolating.
Yes. Well, we're excited about that. So I don't know, like, I think we're running short on time a little bit. I think we're gonna have Vashti back like at least once a quarter. What do you think, Marci?
Absolutely. Yeah. I just feel like this is such good information for parents. And I think so many people are struggling right now. So appreciate that. Just, it's such practical, useful advice. And it's from a perspective that kind of makes you say, oh, I see. Yeah. And I think that's fantastic. It's before we close up. So is there anything else like that you really want to make sure people know about what you're doing, or about, about this topic that we didn't cover yet?
I mean, people can always visit my website to see what I'm doing.
Tell us your website address.
It's familyhealingpathways.com.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think I guess the message for parents is just to have some self-compassion. This is really hard. What we are being called to do in this day and age is really hard. So just being gentle with yourself and giving yourself a lot of grace, knowing that, you don't have to be perfect, right? It's not about perfection. It's about progress. And just the fact that you keep showing up every day, that's the work. And that's what you can celebrate. And, and I think also it's really easy to be on social media as an adult and see on Mother's Day or different holidays, these pictures of these perfect families, and feel alone in your struggle and feel like, I remember thinking this at times in my life too, why am I the only one who can't get this right? Everyone else is getting this right. I'm not getting this right. And that's just false. Like, there's so many people struggling. There are so many kids struggling. So you're not alone in your struggles. And just being really careful of your own self-talk and finding some compassion and grace for yourself as you navigate these really rough waters. It's challenging.
Yes.
For sure. Well, thank you, Vashti. This has been awesome. I learned so much every time I spend time with you. So we're gonna have to make it more of a habit.
The feeling's mutual. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I wish you the best of luck with all that you're putting out into the world. The world needs it. And I look forward to seeing all the ways you evolve as an organization.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vashti.
Thank you.
And now for a moment about meditation and how it can help you and your family to self-regulate and mindfully return to a place of calm and centeredness. Our Core Tools platform consists of a number of proven tools and techniques that are designed to reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm, in spite of whatever is going on in your world. Meditation is just one of these powerful tools, and through a special partnership with Donna Appadone, we've created a special group of meditations available only on our platform and via Donna's own website. Donna Appadone describes them as brief, vibrant motivators to keep you focused on your purpose. Let's listen to a few seconds of this week's meditation, and then Donna will tell you more about it.
We carry it with us. All of it. Every bit of our lives, plus the bits we pick up from other people. We ignore, we dismiss, we override, but it's all still there. Until we release. Hi, I'm Donna Appadone, and I'm the person who writes and produces meditations for Core Experience. We just heard a tiny bit, just the first few lines of this week's meditation, which has an important message. Don't pick up garbage. Don't pick that up, it's dirty. You've heard that 1,000 times, right? Well, that's a pretty important conversation to be having, because we're all exposed to a fair amount of trash from the people who surround us, whether we know them or not. When you see garbage, when you experience garbage, discard it. Don't hold on to it. You wouldn't want to keep somebody else's garbage in your house. So why do you internalize the gossip or the bad energy that you pick up from the people around you? Get rid of it. Release it. It's the right thing to do, not only for yourself, but for your friends and your family too. No matter what's going on with you right now, remember, you can do anything you set your heart to do. We see the load carried by those around us. We help them where and when we can, as they do for us. This is how we share the load. This is how we travel together.
Donna's book, called Drive Time Meditations, is a collection of 183 of her purpose-driven motivators. Drive Time Meditations is available on Amazon.
Thanks for listening to the Warrior Parent Podcast. You can find us at coreexperience.org. You can find more about our guest, Vashti Summervill, and her company, Family Healing Pathways, at familyhealingpathways.com. Next week, we'll be talking with Donna Appadone regarding purpose and looking at her book, Transformission, which can guide you and your family to find your purpose work in life.
Our meditation segment is produced by Donna Appadone with music from Scott Holmes. The full collection of meditations is at Donna's book, Drive Time Meditations, available at Amazon and at donnaappadone.com. We want to thank Samuel Hell, LLC, for sponsoring this podcast. Technical and marketing comes from She Reigns Creative, as well as Inspire Your Brand. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of the hosts, producers, or the financial advisors and supporters. I am Debbie DiManno.
And I'm Marci Mitchell. The Warrior Parent Podcast is a production of Core Experience.